Thank you for joining me in relation to this introduction to your MA or Management Accounting course for your ACCA qualification. The purpose of this introductory video is just to give you an idea of what's in front of you in terms of subject areas, resources, and possibly an approach to passing this exam. In essence, the Management Accounting course dealing with our first area in terms of a summary is really based on the definition of management accounting. In other words, the idea that management accountants really plan, control, and make decisions. The essence of management accounting, as we flow through each of the 26 chapters within the MA Study Hub, is shown to be really being able to deal with internal management accounting information, and indeed to be able to use that information to be able to control a business and indeed to make decisions. So really in this first part of this introductory video, really we start in the Study Hub with our first chapter, Management Information. And really, within that chapter, we see the differences between looking at accounting from a management perspective, management accounting, and indeed looking at accounting from a financial perspective. So really, when we compare the two, it's broadly speaking about sort of internal on the management accounting side and sort of external on the financial accounting side. So really, the first chapter is discursive, and then we move within the Study Hub and the 26 chapters into the area of materials, labor, and overhead. Just to emphasize in terms of the way in which the ACCA approached this MA course, certainly there's a fair bias towards manufacturing. So really the early chapters after the first introductory chapter really assume that we're sort of dealing with a manufacturing style organization, that is buying in materials and using them to make a product, using labor, and has a myriad or a plethora of different overheads to account for. Now, we move from that second area of accounting for materials, accounting for labor, and indeed accounting for overheads, really into the area of costing and indeed how a business can cost. And note that in the costing area, there's a number of different approaches that a management accountant or indeed a management accounting department can take to costing. And broadly speaking, they're split into two main areas. The sort of traditional approaches, for example, absorption costing and marginal costing, and perhaps the more contemporary approaches like ABC, activity-based costing. So do remember when you're in the costing area the difference between the two, and indeed the reason why more contemporary approaches have become more widely used and more popular over the last sort of 20 to 30 years. And the main reason for that is really automation. So less labor, more fixed overhead. From the costing area, we move into a more sort of technical and mathematical section of the course, and that includes things like time series analysis, regression analysis, and indeed various areas that if you're reasonably okay with mathematics, equations, etc., you should be comfortable with that. If you're not, then you might need to spend just a little bit more time on that middle section, which has a heavy sort of numerical focus. We move from that section of the course really into the area of sort of, budgeting. So we talked a little bit about costing. Budgeting is certainly a big area for businesses in the planning cycle. So really what we're talking about is preparing budgets in advance and obviously looking to actual figures every month or every quarter and perhaps comparing the two. Note, as with costing, within the budgeting area, there are the sort of traditional approaches to budgeting and perhaps the more contemporary approaches to budgeting. For example, I bring your attention to the whole concept of beyond budgeting, which sort of throws budgeting on its head and sort of introduces the idea that we should really be more flexible in terms of our approach to budgeting rather than having a fixed budget for the year and just sticking to it over time. From that area of budgeting, we move more towards sort of more contemporary areas, and in particular the area of variance analysis. Now, I've mentioned budgeting, but certainly variance analysis and indeed standard costing are, I would say, a technically quite difficult area of the course. The variance analysis chapter is quite a long one, a lot of computations in there, a lot of twists and turns, and if you're new to management accounting, I'd ask you to ensure that you spend enough time or allocate enough time to that particular area of the course for two reasons. Firstly, as mentioned, it's a little bit tricky, but secondly, it tends to be heavily focused on in the ACCA exam by the examiner, because the examiner is aware that variance analysis causes students problems. Really, the final main area of the subject matter as shown within the ACCA Study Hub is really the performance area, or performance measurement and management. And really in that area we look at how we measure performance, what's important, what isn't, and the different metrics and measures that we could use. There's also some sort of more contemporary sort of input there in terms of changes in performance management and measurement over the course of the last 20 to 30 years as opposed to the traditional view. So really, this first part of the introduction video just really sets the scene across the 26 chapters that you'll see in the MA course. It's quite a lot of chapters, but certainly do bear in mind that many of the chapters are quite short and you won't find yourself taking too long to get through them. The next area of this sort of introductory video is just to give you a feel for the range of different resources that are within this course. I mean, obviously you have access to the ACCA Study Hub, which houses each of the chapters, and within each chapter you have a lot of information, both numerical and indeed narrative. You have activities, quizzes, etc. Outside of that first area, we've provided you with mind map videos and mind map PDFs. Now, those mind map videos and mind map PDFs are based directly on the 26 chapters. So really, if you will, we've summarized the information within the 26 chapters into a slightly more manageable format. So that second area houses our mind map videos and indeed a PDF of each of the mind maps that you'll see within each of the videos. I guess the third key area, sort of going in order, is really the objective test section. Again, referring back to the Study Hub, you'll see that you have a section that has OT questions on each of the 26 chapters. And what we've done within our videos is give you a walkthrough of a sample of those questions across each of the chapters. So that's sort of area 3, and if you will, area 4 then is back to the ACCA. It's really the practice platform. In other words, the idea that in the hub, in the portal, the ACCA have provided you with past exams, mock exams, etc., etc. So that would probably be, for most students, the final area that you would go to. So far we've sort of introduced broadly the subject matter. We looked at the various resources that you have both within the ACCA Study Hub and indeed the resources provided by ourselves. Let's now talk about an approach to dealing with the resources that you have. I always think that when you're trying to get ACCA qualified, one of the things that's key is your tactics. In other words, how you approach the material. Now, we've thought about this, and we think that really there's two main ways that you can use the resources that are available to you. Let's call them sort of Plan A and Plan B. Now, for Plan A, and this is going to be relevant to most ACCA students who are undertaking this MA course, it's literally going to be that you start at the beginning with the ACCA Study Hub, and you literally go through each chapter in order. And what I mean by that is, as you're flowing through, as you're reading through each of the MA chapters, you're doing the activities, each of the activities that's shown within the chapter. Don't avoid the activities because they're a core part of the foundation of your learning. So really you get to the end of each chapter, you'll see that there are quizzes. Again, I'd encourage you to do everything in front of you. Certainly do the quizzes as well. And what I would then see you doing is going directly to the mind map videos that we provided to you, and indeed the mind map PDFs. So what you'll find is that they will re-emphasize key points within each of the chapters that you've just covered. So in essence, that second area is our resources, videos and mind maps, and if you will, you can certainly add notes to the printed PDF mind maps that we provided you with. The third area for me under this Plan A, remember the first of two, is what I would call a recap. I think it's important, once you've been through the ACCA Study Hub yourself, every single chapter, and indeed the videos and PDFs, for you to recap and go back to any areas that are causing you difficulties. In other words, plug the gaps. You know, it stands to reason across 26 MA chapters that some areas will come to you easy and some will be a little bit tricky, perhaps variance analysis as an example. So really the third prong of this particular Plan A attack, if you will, is plugging the gaps. Revise anything and everything that has caused you issues. The next area for you is really, again, back to the videos, the OT or Objective Quest videos that we've prepared for you. You'll recall that I mentioned in part 1 that we've done walkthroughs of videos across every single chapter, and you may find those walkthroughs very, very helpful, perhaps after or possibly before you've actually done the questions yourself. The final area really is the practice platform, and that really should be left for me right to the end. What I mean by that is the practice platform houses exams, and one thing that you've got to do prior to the big day, prior to your MA exam, is certainly to focus in on putting yourself in the position that you'll be in on the big day. In other words, doing mock exams under full exam conditions and timed. So in essence, there you have it in terms of our Plan A. And as mentioned, I think the Plan A approach will probably suit most students. Now, Plan B is very, very similar, except it would exclude Part 1. Plan B would be suitable to a student who has some management accounting experience, perhaps is familiar with costing, familiar with budgeting, or perhaps has done studies previously at degree level or at any other level, which really hone in on the core areas of management accounting. So if you will, Plan B, which would skip the ACCA Study Hub in terms of going through the chapters in detail entirely and go straight to Part 2, straight to the mind map videos and indeed the mind map PDFs. Now, the reason that I suggest a Plan B, it may not suit many students, is time. Because I think the Plan B would obviously shorten the amount of time exposure that you have to get from the beginning of the course to the end. But certainly Plan B wouldn't be suitable for a student that had no management accounting experience and really no idea about things like costing, budgeting, performance measurement, etc. Okay? So, in essence, in this next part, what I want to take you through is, outside of your choice of, well, I think I'll go Plan A or I think I'll go Plan B, I want to take you through some just basic study technique advice and indeed some exam technique advice. As mentioned before earlier on, your approach to your studies, how you study, when you study, what you do when you study, is part of the key to your success. I always think that good study technique coupled with good exam technique is a recipe for success. And unfortunately, the opposite is also true. So, in terms of this final area of this particular video, really, let me approach this in terms of some broad do's and don'ts in your MA studies. And I base this on my own personal experience of study, but also from dealing with many, many students over the last 15 years in ACCA MA and indeed a range of other subjects. The first thing on the do's, things that I need you to do, are, first off, let's get organized. Organize yourself in terms of time and your week. I would say ballpark in terms of the amount of time that you need week to week over, let's say, a 6 or 7 week period, for an average student around about 10 to 12 hours. So really what I'm saying is you need to plan your week Monday to Sunday and make sure that you know in advance when your study sessions are going to be. That's going to help you when you get to them. You also need to plan how you're going to approach the study hub and indeed the chapters. So first things first is get organized. There's limited time, but if it's used well, it's enough time for you to be ready for your MA exam. I think the second point is, and again, this may lose a little bit in translation, but I think it's very important, is do remember in your ACCA studies, whether it's MA or any other subject, that part of the key to learning and learning effectively and quickly is doing. Yeah. Now, what I mean by that is there are passive study activities and there are active study activities. When I say active, I'm talking about doing things. I'm talking about doing the activities in each of the 26th chapter, doing the quizzes, doing the OT questions, etc. So really, the idea within learning material at the MA level is to practice, practice, practice. The narrative or the theory side is of course important, but the emphasis should be on doing. So within each study session, you should be trying to do as many questions as you can. Linked into that, I think that a concept that you could think about, although it's not obligatory, of course, is certainly in terms of how to learn quickly, I would say be very, very comfortable to fail in your preparation phase. In other words, to get questions wrong. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, because do bear in mind, we're in the preparation phase. So there's nothing wrong with you going through a set of questions and indeed messing them all up, but then learning from the model solutions. So don't be frightened to fail. I think failing is absolutely okay in your prep phase. Final point, really more of a sort of a personal point than anything else, is I think it's important within your MA exam and indeed across the board in your ACCA qualification to believe in yourself. In other words, to believe that if I do this work in a systematic, organized way, that I'm going to get the result that I need. You've got to have belief that will really help you stay on track when you have good days and bad days, or maybe good weeks and indeed bad weeks. So those are the main do's for me. In terms of the don'ts, what would be the don'ts or my advice to you at this stage in relation to your sort of MA course? Well, I think there's several things. I think first things first, one of the things that students may be inclined to do within their ACCA studies is certainly to procrastinate or delay. In other words, to maybe put things off to tomorrow, or I'll start next week. I would encourage you, now that you're at the beginning of the course, to make use of your time and to make use of it right now. Don't delay, because time is limited. We've got to take action. As I said earlier on, 6 to 7 weeks is absolutely ample time to get through a subject like this. The next key point is, again, something that I've seen from interaction with MA students and other ACCA students over the years, is this idea of note making. I think note making is okay, but if note making is an absolute priority for you, in other words, if it's the first and most important thing that you're inclined to do, I think just be careful with that. Note making on this MA course, let's say, takes a lot of time. I would avoid copious amounts of notes, literally reams and reams of A4 paper. I mean, do bear in mind that with the MA course that we provided you with, you do have mind map PDFs. So in essence, we provided you with a set of notes that summarize the 26 chapters. Now, what you could do is add to those mind maps, literally, in bits and pieces. But what I would avoid doing is making notes from fresh across the board in each of the 26 chapters. And the main reason for that is time. Making notes takes a lot of time, and it takes away from the doing that I've mentioned earlier on. In other words, the amount of time that you have available for question practice, for getting things wrong, for going into the model solutions and model answers and learning from failure. Okay? I think the next key point is linked into what I've just said, in terms of where you allocate your time. I mean, for me, across the board within MA, and indeed really within the whole ACCA qualification, the key to success is really failure. Now, I mentioned that up top. It's so important that you put yourself in the position that you're going to be on the big day of the exam. In other words, that you reach a point when you've been through the study hub, when you've been through the mind map videos, and indeed the mind map itself, when you've been through the OT section, that you get into the practice platform and undertake mock exams, undertake past exam questions, because at that stage of proceedings, when you're fairly close to the exam, your level and pace of learning will be so much higher. So it's essential that that final phase you don't exclude, and indeed that you make enough time for. Okay? So that really concludes this sort of introductory 4-part video. I hope that it made sense to you. I do wish you good luck with your studies, and indeed that you'll get the result that you need on results day. I wish you well, and thank you for listening to me.